Hey, what is up? This is Jake. Just got done hanging a few stands based on some recent intel for the start of Scrape Week. This week on the video podcast, we have Chris Creed. Now, Chris, we just posted a acorn identification video with him. It was fantastic. In this episode, we're going to be talking about broadheads, arrow builds, and everything else that kind of goes into that topic. Chris manages Afflictive Broadheads, so has many years of experience on this topic. We hope you guys enjoy it. If you do, hit the like button, subscribe. Let's get into it.
Lights,
camera,
follow the trail.
ready to shoot.
If you know where a deer's bedding and you know where he's eating, that deer should be dead.
Camera.
If you're passive on a deer, what you're doing is you're teaching them.
I've got 30 bucks in the Michigan record book. Everyone but one has had at least one previous wound on his body. Some had as many as 4.
Trail Cam Radio from the guys at Exodus.
All right, we're live, Trail Cam Radio. Cameron and I are in the home of, I guess it's not home, but shop of Chris Creed with Afflictor Broadheads. Pretty cool setup here. It's good for us to get out of the office once in a while and not record in our own studio, so very lucky to be here. Chris, you're a guy that very knowledgeable about arrows, broadheads. You've been doing this, you've been in the industry for a long, long time, doing a lot of different things. I'm not going to botch up your intro, so I probably won't do you justice. So if you would, go ahead and give all of our listeners a brief introduction of who you are, what you do, and how, and I guess how you're associated with Afflictor Broadheads and what you do for them.
Sure. Well, yeah, I've been in the industry for over 20 years, but I think that most of my experience comes just from the fact that this is all I know. I mean, I didn't play sports when I was a kid. I've never even watched an entire football game. So I don't know what to tell you other than my whole life has been spent either in the woods or on the water with a bow gun or fishing pole or a tent. So basically a lot of my knowledge comes from that and being in the industry. And we're 80% self-sufficient in our family, so we hunt and fish to keep things going. And that's basically it. I got started early on in the industry about 20 years ago in desperation, working for a rep group for free, selling products. Went to my first ATA, and I sat in a shooting lane all day long, except to go to the bathroom one time because I was just so excited to be at my first ATA over 20 years ago. And so it was a really big deal to me. But that's how I got started, and then that evolved into having my own consulting business and a great partner, and we were able to do a lot of things with some products and got our hands into outdoor television and guiding and manufacturing and patents, and all that was just how we got started. Then I had a run-in with Keith Powell, owner of Afflictor Broadheads, about 5 years ago, and that changed my whole course of direction, and now I'm working exclusively for them.
Very, very cool. Very cool. So today we want to talk about arrow setups, broadheads, the difference between, you guys have a ton of different SKUs. We want to talk about different SKUs, the mechanicals versus fixed versus hybrids, the pros, the cons, the craze that seems to be the current day trend of, the high FOC, heavy arrow builds. Everybody's going nuts about this stuff.
Yeah, they sure are.
So let's start with kind of breaking down what Afflictor has to offer. I guess even before that, let's look at fixed blades versus mechanicals versus hybrid. And let's talk through this a little bit, because there's some questions there that I know Cameron and I have. We've discussed in the office, the pros and cons to kind of each different type of broadhead. So let's start there.
Okay. Well, fixed, we'll start there. That's kind of the easiest. Fixed is fixed, right? Yeah. So we got 2 blades.
I like that.
2 blades with bleeders. We got 3 blades. We got 4 blades. And now you can even see there's some fixed blades out there that got, the ferrules have blades sticking out all over the place, and they're still considered a fixed blade because the blades are permanently locked into position. And so, you have that category. Fixed blade probably has the widest range of available weights and styles, I would say. You can get all the way down, some of them to 65 grains and way over 300 now. You can get them with solid machined or replaceable blades or permanent blades. So fixed is a kind of a really big category, and it's probably been the most dependable category because that's what everything started out as in the beginning. When you move up to your mechanicals, again, you have a category there that's just full of all kinds of different broadheads that front deploying, rear deploying, and different weights and styles, and over the band blades and O-rings and spring loaded now, and things that get cut little pins in the middle of the ferrule. I mean, there's a bunch of choices out there, and it gets very confusing. And then on top of that, you add these hybrid categories where, we have a mechanical that's somewhere has fixed in its production, supposedly, where are we at here, and what's the purpose of that? But it's still just a mechanical, even though it's a hybrid and has some type of fixed blade in its design. But you can get lost. I mean, that's a lot of broadheads.
It's such a hard decision. It's like prior to, I guess the YouTube media has kind of brought it about, like all the different choices. Like prior, getting into bow hunting, I was like, oh, I got to shoot a mechanical. They fly like field tips, and that's what I shot for the last 3 years. And then the hunting public kind of brought some light to fixed blade, heavy arrows, single bevel fixed blade broadheads, and I started diving into it, and I was like, oh my gosh, like, where do I even start? But I kind of landed on the Afflictor K2 this year, which is the 4-blade, and that baby shoots sweet.
Yeah, that's
one of my favorites.
Made the same decision last week to roll with that. When we start looking at, let's go over some of the pros and cons, and let's start with mechanical blades. I've shot mechanicals for a long time, never had any issues. I mean, you see the horror stories of the mechanical failures. There's always worries that they won't open, and the common sense thing, or what guys say, is shoot the deer in the back of the lungs. You don't have to worry about pressuring that shoulder area and worry about hitting any bone. Personally, I have a super long draw length. I shoot heavyweight. The loss of kinetic energy is not an issue for me personally. Now, there are some other things that I worry about, but as we were talking before, you said, not to quote you in your own words, but from our experience in manufacturing, with any kind of mechanical device, there's potential there for failure or error.
Sure, absolutely.
So let's just give a brief overview of some of the pros and cons of those mechanical blades.
Yeah, well, of course, mechanicals came about originally for two reasons. Guys wanted to shoot a long way, and they were having problems with fixed blades planing or doing other weird things, and they wanted giant cuts. They wanted bigger cuts. You were kind of maxing out at just over that inch range for the longest time in the fixed blade category, and now you can find much bigger, of course. But when the mechanicals first came around, that was the answer to everybody's problems. Oh, yeah, we can do all this. But I think when it first got started, a lot of people weren't realizing, my goodness, I really got to have the right arrow build to handle a mechanical properly. I got to have enough KE. I got to have enough momentum to make this thing even work right. And going back to what you said about, mechanical head is something that can fail. Absolutely. But I attribute, at least in a lot of my phone calls that I get, failure is not in the broadhead, it's in the setup. And of course, we won't even get into the shot placement, because the first, if somebody shoots a deer in the rear end, the first thing they blame is the broadhead. I mean, that's just how it goes.
Yeah.
But the mechanical was the answer to solve some other solutions, and it is very effective. Even though, no matter how it boils down, it is still a device that can fail on any configuration.
So, what are those arrow builds that are kind of best suited for mechanical heads? I'm assuming heavy arrows with producing more KE.
Sure.
Momentum.
Yeah, momentum. KE is good.
Momentum.
Momentum is basically the key. I mean, if you're into Dr. Ashby or Ranch Fairy or anybody right now, you can get lost in all this stuff. And and while there is a lot of merit and fun to taking a bare shaft arrow and knock tuning and going through all that, not everybody has the time or the finances to do that.
Or
right?
the want to.
I don't have the time or the want to.
Or maybe even the desire. You're right. When I got started in this industry, you went to Walmart. There was a giant box this big of arrows sticking out of it, and they weren't even all the same stuff, but most of them were Easton Double X 75 22 16s. Right? Yep. I think everybody.
That's what I shot.
That's what everybody shot, right? Which was a heavy aluminum arrow, and it did the job back then. And then we got into these carbons, and then the speed thing came out where we wanted to go fast. We want to shoot flat. I want to be able to use the same pin at 40 yards. All speed does is make you miss faster. There's nothing really to speed. I mean, most
I like
of
that quote.
our average shots, 25 yards, and at the speed of sound, they're going to hear that bow before your arrow every time. So, I mean, it's just nothing that you can do about it. They're not going to really duck an arrow at our current speeds at 25 yards all that often. That it has to be a really big consideration.
So, is there like a minimum poundage that you would recommend to someone that wants to shoot a mechanical blade? Because I see a lot of people, like kids and people with shoulder issues and women shooting mechanical blades, and I always tell them, like, you got to make sure you have enough momentum for that mechanical blade to deploy.
Sure.
But is there like a recommended weight for someone? Like, if you shoot X amount of weight, you shouldn't shoot a mechanical. Is there an answer like that?
Well, we have states that don't have any restrictions on that in the U.S. Most of the states do, but some don't. So I get calls where people say, my kid's shooting 35, 38 pounds, 40 pounds. And they are achieving success with a mechanical because they have the right momentum. So that kid may not be able to shoot beyond 25 yards without shooting a rainbow, but at that distance in, they're having excellent penetration, even pass-throughs, because they have got their FOC or their weight or their momentum up enough to allow that mechanical broadhead to be successful. However, that being said, the choice of that mechanical on those setups is pivotal. So I would never say to a kid, hey, you can shoot this 2.5-inch mechanical on 40 pounds. That's detrimental. That just takes so much energy to make that all work out. But if you have a mechanical that has a smaller cut, doesn't have to break a band or cut something open where you're losing that energy, and you're gaining all the momentum of that arrow, I think that you can put a low-pounded shooter into a mechanical broadhead.
I think there's the one point you just made there about how those blades are actually being deployed and what the process they have to go through there is something that a lot of guys probably overlook, because the added steps, whether it's a rubber band or however those things deploy, it's going to take extra energy to for those things.
And even how they deploy. If you got a front deploying broadhead that is depending on going through the meat and is not actually opening all the way at entrance, it's opening as it's going through, you're losing energy that whole time.
Right.
And if you take a ferrule that's very tapered and very pointy, you're also considering your arrow drag that entire length. So you're losing your energy and your momentum right up front.
Right.
Yeah. Well, that was one thing when we were shooting broadheads last week, when we were kind of going through our process of shooting some of these, comparing penetration, arrow flight, even some of the noise that different broadheads were making. We did shoot an afflictor mechanical. You remember what model that was?
K2 hybrid.
Mm-hmm.
Was it the K2 hybrid?
Yep.
I thought we shot, it was a different brand, NAP.
NAP.
But the K2 hybrid, when we shot that into a block target, it opened on entrance. So there was a significant entrance
right up front
channel along with an exit channel. So
yeah, and that was the whole premise of when Keith invented the product, he wanted something that was opened at entrance before, and that didn't take any lost energy to do it. And he came up with that drive key technology, and it's just amazing.
Explain that a little bit, because there's drive key. Without someone going and
Googling, right.
Googling or visiting the afflictor page, they're not going to have no idea what we're talking about.
Yeah, I would even back up from there. So you were talking about like making sure you have a broadhead that you know how it's opening, you know what energy is taken. Start with like what afflictor has done to provide an arrow that, like, the premise of this is that it doesn't break the O-ring. There's no O-ring over top of the blade.
Yeah, so at the very back of our ferrule is our O-ring, and instead of having it over the blades where you're losing energy cutting it, it's underneath the very back corners and takes absolutely nothing to roll out. In fact, most of the time when you shoot the broadhead, the O-ring is just going to roll up the shaft. You won't break it. And if you are breaking it, it's very rarely in an animal. It's most often in a really dense target where the heat has built up enough to heat up that silicone enough that it breaks. But its whole design is to just really simply and easily roll out. And that coupled with the drive key, so the drive key is right behind the tip, and the second that it's activated, it comes back, and now you have a locked fixed blade before it does any cutting. So the tip has entered, but the blades haven't got there until they're fully locked and deployed, so there is zero energy loss. So that's why we have so many low poundage shooters having success with the broadhead, because even if they had an underweight arrow, they were still getting good penetration because there was no energy loss. So that was the whole key to everything, was the drive key, and then coupled with that O-ring, there's no energy being lost hardly at all.
So that drive key, I guess, go in a little more detail. I'm assuming that is a pin or key that's aligned vertically inside that head and slides vertically up and down to deploy those heads.
Correct. Yeah. So it sits nicely at the front, right behind the tip, and then as it comes back, it rides into a slot, immediately opens the blades, and then it falls into a back slot that locks the blades. And the only way it's going to be unlocked is if you manually pull that drive key forward. And this current technology on this drive key is designed to shear if it hits heavy bone, so the broadhead keeps penetrating. Even if it shears, the broadhead stays locked.
So that helps eliminate additional drag or loss of energy when you're going through that.
Right.
Increased penetration.
And it also acts as a bleeder blade, which makes a really big difference too. So, you're getting an extra 5/8 cut on the sides.
Okay, that makes sense. That answers some of the questions we had when we were walking through shooting those last week.
It's different. It really is a totally different design to having that rear deploying that doesn't lose any energy. It's made a huge difference for us. I mean, that's the reason I came to work for Afflictor in the beginning. I mean, I was a fixed blade guy. I had so many issues with different mechanicals on hunts and terrible failures and lost animals, and I was sick. Especially back then, we were still depending on these animals. I'm not looking for a trophy. I'm looking to put something in the freezer, right? So if I lost my opportunity, it was a big deal, especially if I got to go on a hunt or was somewhere out of state, and it could be a tragedy for me at that time. So I just gave them up. And one hunt in particular, I lost 3 animals to a mechanical broadhead, all on camera, all great shots, and all documented failures on that broadhead. So I was staunch fixed, and when the owner of Afflictor approached me, the first 3 times he talked to me, I told him I was not interested in helping him. I said, well, that's really cool. And I played with it sitting at ATA at some other manufacturer's table. I thought, that's really nice. I like it. Here you go. I don't want anything to do with it. He's like, what, really? I said, yeah, it's not for me. I'm a fixed blade guy. And finally he says, will you take some home and test them? And I said, sure. So I took them home, and I planned on being a real jerk. I got out graph paper and the micrometer and my scale, and I took it apart and weighed every piece and measured them. And he says these are 32 seconds. I bet they're 32 seconds, rats. Because I don't want to like them. I want to tell this guy that your broadheads are not what they're supposed to be. I couldn't find anything wrong, and so I put them aside for literally 2 months, and then I took them out in the backyard, and I started shooting them. And the more I tried to hate them, the more I fell in love with them. I mean, they were out penetrating stuff in my recurve setups at 45 and 50 pounds. They were out penetrating fixed blade broadheads by 14 to 24 inches. And I thought, it's really got something here. And so the more I shot them and saw that they were doing what they were supposed to do, I called them up and I said, hey, I'm not only just willing to help you out, I'll come work full time and quit everything I got. And that's how I got started. I was that invested after all these years in that design.
That's serious conviction.
So I was and plus the guy is just great, and it's a small family business. He's not interested in selling out to any of the big boys, and we have control. We now have a factory where every one of them is hand built and by us, tested by us. We spin them before they go out the door, and if you need customer service, you call and you get somebody.
Yeah.
And if you don't, I'll call you back.
Yep. Well, one of the things too, just on the Afflictor side, you guys are packaged. So you're going through that process of building these, assembling these in Texas, and physically weighing and then packaging those weights together. So if you have a 100 grain head, let's say it comes in at 102 grains, like those are going to be packaged together. Right. So we're going to have consistent arrow builds with that.
That's a really nice advantage.
It's important, guys that are really serious about, especially your long range guys, right? You got your elk hunters, and they think that, they might have an opportunity at a 60 or 70 yard plus shot. They want to make sure everything's perfect. Yeah. So, kind of an industry, I don't even know if you can call it industry standard, but there's this whole plus or minus 7 grains that seems to be acceptable. You can weigh out a bunch of broadheads that's sold as 100 grains, but it came in at 107. Well, if I have 100 and a 99 and 107 in my package, it's not going to make any difference at 25 yards. But beyond that, now all of a sudden, I got some problems. So, yes, we were very particular about, even grouping everything up.
I want to jump back a little bit to these mechanicals. As I said earlier, I shot mechanicals for a long time. Never had any issues. But made the switch probably 4 or 5 years ago, maybe 6 years ago, to fixed blades for fear. Well, one, I was going on an elk hunting in a western state, and I had to use fixed blade. So I was shooting a Magnus buzz cut, I think.
Buzz cut?
Yeah, Magnus buzz cut. But part of that switch and staying with fixed blades was those really hard quartering away shots, those steep angles where you have certain mechanical blades that if a single blade is deployed on one side, there's going to be drag, and it's going to kick the back end of that arrow around, and then all of a sudden, instead of going through your target or getting some penetration, now you just skirted down the rib cage or skirted down the side. Right. That's a real issue with mechanicals.
Sure can be.
So is there anything in the afflictor blade that helps prevent that, or is that still a general issue with mechanicals?
No, we don't. We have not found any issue there with our design. The drive key, even if one side is activated, since it's a straight piece, it activates both blades and you're locked.
Right.
And with our tip design, we have very good penetration at angled shots. In fact, I love when people do independent testing, but sometimes you're scared to death, like, oh my gosh, what are they doing? How's it going to make me look? Well, if an independent guy shoots your stuff and then that really is the telltale to me. How's that going to do for the average consumer when he buys the product? And there you'll see a lot on YouTube, especially independent guys with angled shots, and they have all done very well. And that's good. And once in a while, you'll see somebody do something that just scares you to death. They put out a 3-inch piece of plate steel, and you're like, this is not going to go good. What I mean?
That happens across all market categories, all
right.
product.
Well, I can't say that I haven't done it with everything, and everybody else's too.
Right. So let's jump over to fixed. It seems like with the Range Fairy and Dr. Ashby and like these high FOC, heavy momentum, kinetic energy builds, a lot more guys are starting to shoot fixed blades.
Yeah, it's coming back around for sure.
Right, but I think the worry with a lot of people is the tuning or flight aspect. Everybody's like, I don't want to shoot fixed blades because they're going to be 3 inches off from my field points, and I don't have time to mess with that. I want something on the front just to. When I shot those K2s last week, all I did was align the fixed blades, the main blades, with my cock vane. Made sure my knock was good, and those things shot like darts. There was no
extra tuning.
There was zero extra tuning. So is the tuning issue, is that a common thing that you get from customers?
No, we don't. We get asked that question before they purchase, but we don't get asked that question after they purchase, except for certain situations. I don't know what act of God in this design allows it to do so good, whether it's the tip or whatever, but our flight is unreal. Even now, these high-speed crossbows, these guys are shooting them at 80 yards, and they're ruining their arrows. So we're just blessed for that reason. But I would say that what was the original question? I got sidetracked. My brain's going 100 mile an hour. You did too.
I just gave him the blank stare.
Oh, I got it. I'm back on track.
Aero flight.
Yeah, about aero flight. So yeah, we don't get that question after people purchase them unless they have a wonky setup. And let me describe wonky setup. And somebody may kill me for this, but this is my personal opinion, and I found this to be true in all my testing. If you have a heavy helical, I don't care if it's our fixed blade or somebody else's fixed blade or even a mechanical that has any type of wing structure on it at all, you have to tune, and it's a pain in the butt because your broadhead is a rudder fighting that heavy helical fletching on the back because you're spinning so fast. Yeah. So for heavy helicals and target guys with field points, absolutely phenomenal. That's what it takes. You're spinning that arrow fast. Your accuracy is great. Your consistency is great. But for what I have tested personally, I see that heavy helical causes problems. And of course, if you have a real spine issue, if you're shooting a really weak spine, you got guys that have problems, and it's not the broadhead,
Right.
whether it's ours or somebody else's. Now, even on a proper setup, you will see that a lot of fixed blades that have a bigger profile will tend to plane. That's just the art of flying through the air, right? So, but whenever we run into a circumstance where somebody's says the word tune, it is generally because of their fletching and their arrow.
So one of the, I guess, trends going around the industry for bow hunters at least is the high momentum, high FOC arrow builds. Ranch Fairy, the Hunting Public, all those guys have gotten on that train from Dr. Ashby, who through probably the 90s, or was he doing stuff in the 80s in Africa?
I think he was doing stuff earlier than that. Yeah.
Really?
Yeah,
Okay.
I think so.
So he has a ton of information out there on arrow builds, really heavy stuff.
Adult arrows.
Yeah,
adult arrows. Mainly doing things in different tests on African game. Really big game. It takes that your stuff has to be pretty precise. But I feel like this FOC stuff guys are just gotten way overboard with what they're trying to do. But to some degree, having the proper FOC is going to help your arrow flight. That broadhead is going to, or that front weight is going to pull your arrow and allow it to be more accurate. What kind of parameters on your setup do you really need to look at? Is 10% FOC, 13%? I mean, there's guys that want 20 or more.
Yeah.
I think Dr. Ashby recommends 19 to 20, doesn't he?
Yeah,
I'm not sure.
He's higher. If you look at a lot of articles, they're going to all falter around that 10 to 15%, with 13 being the average. You'll see 13% a lot. That's where I like to be. But you can get overboard. But what are you sacrificing if you do have 20% FOC? You're sacrificing your distance, right? You're not going to sacrifice penetration. You can shoot through a milk truck, So I mean, really, it just boils down to what are you doing with your bow? Are you a tree stand guy or ground guy shooting at a water hole that's only 20 yards in front of you, or are you taking long shots? Are you out west after elk? I mean, my first compound was a Bear Indian little wheel bow, and at 20 yards I had to aim about right up here, about just below the sun, and then I could arc an arrow in at 20 yards, and increased FOC eventually is going to get you right back to that,
Right.
So, but yeah, I think you can get overboard on anything you do, right? In the archery industry, it's easy to go up and down and all over. I mean, you just look at how bows have cycled. We go into 2-cam, solo cam, single cam, cams, cam and a half, dual cam, and everything comes back around again. Well, it's no different than momentum and FOC. It's coming back around again, but because speed has ruled for years. It has ruled for years. For the last 15 years, speed has been king, and now finally momentum and FOC is coming back, which is a really good thing. But just like you said, it does not take much for you to get in your head and get overboard when you don't really need to.
So you mentioned that 13% FOC being average, and it made me smile because I guess a couple months ago, Cameron and I are in the office, and we're talking about arrow builds, and like, we gotta start, bear shaft tuning. We got to knock tune. We got to tune our inserts. We got to order these field point kits and shoot anything from 100 grains to 300 grains. We got to figure out. And after a week, I'm like, screw this. Like, my setup last year would have killed anything I shot. Like, why am I changing anything? Right. So then once I started measuring my actual setup without changing anything, I'm right at like 13.7 or something, just under 14% FOC. But I guess my question is, I know I have no arrow flight issues with that out to 50, 60 yards, completely fine. But when you start looking at the FOC, does like a 10%, like, I guess my question is, and I'm not framing this up very good, but for an arrow setup to shoot the same head at like 10% FOC, is there going to be a significant difference in flight other than trajectory when you have like something like 20% FOC?
Well, yeah, you're going to see a little bit of flight difference. It may even change your accuracy if your bow's not tuned. You can definitely run into some issue. But anytime you have that stiffer arrow spine and you're getting out to longer distances, you can change your accuracy really easy. Everything in the archery industry is variable, no matter if you're changing speed, KE, weight, FOC. Everything is variable. It's just that what does that percentage mean to you in your personal setup and what you're hunting and how you're hunting.
Got it.
when you're calculating FOC and you start diving into kinetic energy and momentum and your arrow weight, it can get pretty daunting. At the end of the day, what would you tell someone is the most important factor when deciding, like, okay, I want to shoot 125 grain head, or I want to shoot 150 grain head, or just like if they're starting from scratch getting arrows? Is kinetic energy the main factor? Is momentum the main factor? Is the arrow weight the main factor, or speed? What matters?
Well, a little bit of everything. There's a sweet spot for all of that again correlates to what are you hunting, what's your average distance of shot, and what is your setup. I think that for me, the most important thing hands down is momentum. I mean, there's no doubt in my mind of all my testing over the years, momentum is the key to penetration. It is the driving factor, right? So other than that, I think one of the issues that I've seen, especially on people that are calling and they're getting into this FOC movement and they're putting in a 70 grain insert and then they got a 150 grain broadhead and they're shooting a 500 spine arrow. Oh my gosh, you're going to blow that thing up before it leaves the riser, you know? So I think that there's some education that's also missing in all this, and I think there's a little bit of a danger zone in there that you got to be really careful of, because you get, like right now with everything we got going on, you know, the archery industry and hunting industry as a whole has seen this great upsurge. Even though, you know, we're dealing with a lot of nonsense on the other side, that nonsense has caused this upsurge in the industry, which has increased sales, which has increased the amount of hunters, especially new hunters, new bow buyers. The primary questions this year are not what the primary questions were the last 5 years. As we look at discussion boards, you know, if you look at any of the discussion boards on Facebook, you will see "I am new to hunting" as one of the most primary things coming up. So I think it's essential that those guys are able to understand, or girls or whatever, that there's a sweet spot where all of that comes together and gives you exactly what you need to hunt with, but there's some cautionary things that come in. FOC at too high with the wrong spine arrow, you can have a tragedy. You can run an arrow right into your forearm. And so you just have to weigh all that out in your decision. And for a new guy, where's he going to go for that information? You know, so
Right.
It's hard for some people to find out what is best.
That's fair.
Yeah, I mean, you're right. For someone who, I mean, I've been bow hunting since 1997 on and off, you know. Cameron's relatively new, 4 or 5 years. But even ourselves in the office, like we're going, you know, talking about some of these topics in our free time or whatever. And even for somebody like us, and then we're not Olympic archers.
Yeah,
right?
we're not archers.
We're not archers. We're deer hunters.
Yeah, right.
So we don't get too carried away with some of these setups. But for us who have been in the industry, like it's even daunting for us.
Mm-hmm.
So you're correct that you know, for folks who are relatively new, and maybe somebody's listening to this podcast, make sure you do a little bit of research and educate yourself on what arrow spine is, because depending on, this is, you know, a confusing thing. That's not a consistent metric or measurement between manufacturers. You can get an Easton arrow that has a different spine. It might be a 300 spine, but if you buy a Victory arrow that's 300 spine, like they're measured different. The stiffness is measured different. So it's important that you check what your bow specs are and actually know what your bow specs are, and go look at those spine charts for the manufacturer that you're buying those arrows from.
Absolutely. And like, back up further than that. Like, their arrow spine and your arrow weight are not the same thing.
No, two different
There
arrows,
is a
right?
giant gap there with education that, like, you'll ask people, how heavy is your arrow? And they're like, I'm shooting a 400. I'm like, is that the spine of the arrow or the weight of the arrow?
Right.
And the majority of the time, they're talking about the spine.
Yes.
The spine is the stiffness.
Yeah.
That has nothing to do with the weight.
Right.
Yeah.
And I think that's something that, like, new archers will see on the side of the arrow, 400. I'm like, oh, it weighs 400 grains. That's not.
Well, I
not
think
right.
right. the thing there is make sure if the GPI, grain per inch, isn't labeled on the arrow or the arrow wrap, make sure you check that.
Yeah.
And for me, and correct me if I'm wrong, Chris, but the general rule of thumb there is the stiffer the spine, typically it's going to have a higher GPI.
Yeah.
Yes. Yes.
Okay.
Thicker walled.
Correct.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, one thing that I know, and even in all these years of being in the industry, the more I think I know, the dumber I am. I mean, I don't feel like I know anything half the time, and I certainly don't know close to anything compared to some, but there's so much to learn, and I kind of, like we were talking about before, when you first get into this when we were kids, it was different. Now you have all this stuff at your table. I mean, you can go out and buy a $1,200 compound bow. When I was a kid, you could buy a car for $1,200. So, I mean, it's everything has changed, and so it's just about getting good, solid information. If you have a question about broadheads, you should be able to call your broadhead company, and somebody should be able to walk you through your setup and your questions. And we try to do that with everybody that calls. But like we were talking about, the most common thing right now is new people, new archers, which is wonderful. It's wonderful.
And not only new archers, but with the new interest in FOC and momentum, there's new arrow builds, and there's people wanting to get into this stuff. Like, I'm relatively new to archery, 4 or 5 years, but this is the first year that I'm like, what broadhead am I going to shoot? I didn't just go to Walmart and pick a pack off the shelf and said this has a 2-inch cut. I'm shooting this through a deer. So I'm sure you're getting a lot of people now that are not new to hunting, but new to arrow builds.
Mm-hmm.
So let's kind of play. Well, I have a couple questions. One, I want to tell you my arrow setup and have you recommend a broadhead to me. I already know what I'm shooting. You already know what I'm shooting. But if there's someone out there that has a similar arrow setup to me, this might help them. And then, Chad, you can do the same thing. So I am a 28-inch draw. I'm shooting a 65-pound bow, and my arrows are cut to 28 and a half inches. And I have a 95 grain insert. My arrow weight is like, I think it's 11.2 grains per inch, so whatever that is. It's around 535 grain setup. What afflictor broadhead would you recommend to me?
Well, with that setup, I would say you can shoot anything in our lineup and have successful penetration. No doubt about it. Anything that you wanted. So my question as a consumer would be, are you leaning towards a mechanical hybrid, or are you wanting to shoot a fixed blade broadhead? And then what are the reasons for that? Do you want something that if it gets stuck in a shoulder, buried into an elk somewhere really deep, and that shoulder is going to be working on it the whole time, that you need something that has really thick blades that's going to be stout? And I would definitely, steer you towards a fixed blade broadhead. If you're just whitetail hunting, then it would be your choice.
That's my main fear. I've never had it happen, but if I have a hard quarter two shot, or the only area on the deer I can see is its shoulder, I want to be able to blow through it. And that's why I went to a heavier arrow setup, and that's why I'm shooting the fixed K2 this year.
That's a great choice, and that arrow setup is tremendous. I mean, there's nothing that should stop you.
That's what I like to hear.
Unless you miss.
Yeah, unless I hit it in the ass, and then that's the broadhead's fault.
Yeah, that's what I was just going to say. I missed the deer. It's the broadhead.
I can't wait to call about that.
All right, so I guess my scenario, 30 and a half inch draw, super
nice
long.
and short.
Yeah, right. 72 and a half pound draw, so my limbs are buried.
Goodness sakes.
I'm shooting, it's like bricks. It's like bricks coming out of a cannon. It's incredible. My arrow length, I'm trying to think what my arrow length is. I want to say it's just below 31 inches. I mean, long arrows, yeah. Roughly 555, 558, somewhere in there, total weight, 300-pound spine. I'm shooting the K2s fixed. That was my choice, just because I want to be able to shoot that deer wherever I want.
Yeah,
I want to make sure that I have no worries there in case I have an errant shot, because I am not a great archer, like I said earlier.
Well, I mean, yeah, there's a difference between great and proficient. I don't know any great archers. There's so much relative to that.
Right.
You and Cameron have very similar setups, except he's shooting a lower poundage. You have a higher poundage, but you guys both have heavy arrows, so you can get away with anything you want.
Yep.
My primary call is people that have low poundage and light arrows. I mean, I get called every day. I'm figuring out, once we determine that 400 does not mean grains per inch on their arrow, and we work out their arrow weights, and I mean, we'll look up the manufacturer while I have them on the phone. I'll look up their manufacturer, I'll look up their arrow, we'll do the math, and I see that their total arrow weight is 340 with a 100 grain broadhead. That makes me nervous.
That was me last year, 385.
That makes me nervous. Will it kill a deer? Sure, it will. Are you going to get optimal penetration without a heavy arrow? No, you're really not. And 400 seems to be the low end of the all-around number.
400 grains.
400 grains seems to be that number where you can get away with just about anything except a giant expandable, because you're losing so much momentum. But you guys those are great setups. I mean, you might as well just pack up and go to Africa as soon as they open up.
Well, I switched to that setup 2014 when we were headed west to go on an elk hunt. Is when I switched to the heavier setups.
That has been great. So you didn't get a chance to shoot an elk when you were there?
Oh, I had a chance.
Oh. Different podcast.
Different podcast, long story. I had a really good opportunity at about 12 yards.
My goodness.
Yeah.
Totally different story. I'm the king of screwing stuff up. You hang around me long enough, you'll find that out. I had a question on fixed blades, and now I'm got me off track here a little bit. Oh, I know. The point I wanted to make was last week when we were shooting broadheads together, Cameron and I noticed a significant difference in the noise from that K2 versus the K2 fixed versus some of the expandables that we were shooting, the NAPs and even the Afflictor expandables.
Sure.
That K2 fixed was quieter, which I was surprised. Having a bigger profile, flying or spinning through the air, I thought they would hiss or whistle a little more than what they did. But it was significant. I mean, it was significantly lower decibels or lower noise than any of the other broadheads that we shot.
Even compared to the other fixed. We shot both fixed.
Yeah.
Too.
Yep.
I don't know what it is about the aerodynamics of that head, but we hear that a lot, and people love it for that reason. And that is probably the reason it flies so good at 470 feet per second out of a crossbow. Just the aerodynamics of it, which of course is all about wind, right? And so if wind's passing through something, it's whistling. So whether that's a cut in your ferrule or cut out in the blade or whatever, you got to have a way to make a whistle. So I don't know.
I guess that's what surprised me, because there is part of the main fixed blade that's cut out there.
And on the bleeders.
Yeah, and that thing, I don't know if it's the way it spins and the blade profile or what, but I was taken back at how quiet it was.
There's some things I just can't answer. I don't know.
Yeah.
Matter of fact, the owner and I have a joke on some of this that guys are killing things at 100+ yards, and of course we don't support that. Okay, but they'll call and they're all excited. I killed something at 107 yards and it blew through the animal, and we're like, how did that even happen? So we call it GGM, God Guided Missile, because I don't have any other explanation for it.
Right.
It's just amazing how that 4-blade has developed into a premier broadhead in our line. It's very popular.
Yeah, it's pretty awesome. It's not like, one of the things that scared me about shooting fixed blades was, okay, I shoot the field tips. I have to practice a lot with fixed blades because I'm going to have to retune my bow. And I don't know if it was just our setups. I don't want to say you can grab this broadhead and throw it on your setup and you'll be fine, because that might not be true for everyone. But for Chad and I, we didn't have to do anything different.
That's good.
Line the primary blades up with your cock vane, let her rip.
And we have people that aren't even lining them up. They're just screwing them on and go with whatever blazer vane or whatever vane setup they have. Even those plastic round disc vanes, those
I've seen
pop
those, yeah.
things that pop off.
Yep.
Guys are calling and say they just fly great with those. So again, it's just inherent in the design somewhere. It's just we're just blessed to have it fly so good and be so good. And it's just at almost 60,000 inch thick blades. The thing is just tough as nails, and the blades lock into each other, and then they lock into the ferrule, and then they lock into the tip. I mean, it's just tough.
I'll tell you what, Chris and I have been shooting some content together for Afflictor, and we were shooting some B-roll the other day, and He's like, I better shoot this before we start just to see if the target's going to hold up. And I'm not even kidding. He was shooting a compound bow and took this 100 grain K2 head and blew through this target, like vertically. The target was set long ways. Blew through it, and the broadhead went like 30 yards past the target. It was incredible.
Well, we shot it into that brand new block target, which is a pretty heavy, dense.
Yeah, and that was never shot.
That was the first arrow, I think.
On that side.
One of the first arrows through there.
Yeah.
And there was, I don't know, there was a foot of arrow sticking out the other side.
And the NAP kill zone mechanical didn't even poke through.
No. Yeah. And that was out of my setup, 72.5 pounds, 30.5-inch draw. Just phenomenal stuff.
It actually can be a problem. I mean, the crossbow guys are calling me and saying, "What target do I shoot?" I said, "What do you mean?" "Well, we're either burying the entire bolt in the target or blowing through it." You know.
Yeah.
That's
so
insane.
yeah, they have nothing to even grab because the entire arrow is in, or it has gone completely through. And you know,
one quick tip on that: if you're in that scenario and you have nothing, like, unscrew the head. Don't pull it towards yourself. I've made that mistake, and I've stabbed myself in the stomach with an arrow.
Jake
I had
did
a
it
3D shoot doing that.
last year. A week before we went to Colorado, Jake was pulling a fixed blade broadhead out of a target and sliced his finger open.
Yeah. Just take the heads off before you pull your arrows out.
I cut myself at ATA just showing them to people. You know?
Yeah, these heads are cool, and I'm excited to shoot the hybrids this year too. I'm gonna try to shoot a doe with, I think I want to shoot this K2 Mini, and I want to see how it performs. But I'm pretty excited to try some afflicted broadheads this year.
So on that note, Cameron, we got a little bit out of line kind of going through this discussion a little bit, which is totally okay because there's some good stuff in there. But I want to circle back and talk about the hybrid type broadheads. It's one of the things that, you know, again, Cameron and I last week going through and shooting all these different heads. In my mind, it's not solving any of the problems that you have with a fixed blade, or a mechanical blade. Those potentials for failures are still there. And I guess in my mind, I can't wrap my head around someone choosing a hybrid blade over a fixed blade.
Or mechanical.
Or mechanical. I mean, I see, like, guys are worried about mechanicals, like the shoulder stuff, you know, mechanical failures, those hard angle shots or whatnot. And in my mind, like, if you're thinking that, you should just shoot a fixed blade. But then there's guys like, they're like, well, I'm just going to go in the middle and shoot a hybrid because I want the things to fly good. And I feel like that's how people are making those decisions, and I can't rationalize that.
Yeah.
So I guess talk a little bit about those types of the hybrid type broadheads and you know what we're looking at there.
Yeah, because the hybrid category has kind of expanded on itself here over the last few years, and I guess I always thought originally as hybrids is the contingency plan. Okay, so now I have a mechanical head that some portion of it is fixed. So if my mechanical head doesn't work, I at least have some fixed cutting, and I'm going to cross my finger and hope something dies.
Yeah.
Okay, I mean, that's basically how it goes.
Yeah, because in that fixed portion, it's just like a 1/8 of an inch bleeder blade that it's like, it's a pinhole.
Right. It really, you know, you're looking at the diameter of the arrow. You're a field tip with a little bit of cut, you know?
Yeah, right.
So, you know, the hybrids, in my mind, don't offer you any more reassurance than what we would call a mechanical broadhead, right? They still have the opportunity for failure somewhere at some point. Is it rarer with some than others? Yes, it's everybody deploys differently. We talked about those factors, you know, how much resistance there is in deployment, how they deploy, front deploying, rear deploying. So, you know, you have all these things, and for us, our hybrid portion is that when we enter, we are a locked fixed blade. The blades are locked in place. There is nothing there to open them up, and that's where we got us being a true hybrid broadhead, because nobody else had done that. And so that was our separation, to be a true hybrid. But to your concern, it's still in the mechanical category. You can't get away with that. So, you know, if your mind is telling you, I want something with a wider cut because that's going to give me a bigger hole, a bigger blood trail, and more accuracy, then a mechanical or a hybrid is what you're looking for. That's what you want to shoot, try a few, see how it goes. If you have any other concern then you need to be shooting a fixed blade broadhead. I mean, if you're worried about bone or penetration or failure or something not working like it's supposed to, then you can't go wrong with a fixed head.
Yeah.
I think what's nice about these hybrids is it would solve the problem of the blades deploying when you shoot them. Like a lot of the O-ring style mechanicals, if that O-ring breaks, the blades are going to open.
Yeah, see you later. You hit a branch,
Yeah.
and then all of a sudden you have one wing out there.
Yeah.
And you're
Right.
And with this drive key, it's not these blades won't open until this drive key is initiated. And if only one side is initiated, both blades open.
Well, here's a question on that topic that sparked something. Say you shoot an afflictor mechanical or hybrid, with the drive key. Say you do hit a branch and those open. How well are those flying open, like mid aeroflight? I mean, that's something probably pretty hard to test.
Well,
but
we've shot them open,
Okay.
and they fly pretty good. I mean, you don't really see much of an issue again until you get into helical fletching or some type of steep fletching. There's really not a problem there. That originally developed because when we first made them, the ground blind guys were calling and say, "Hey, can we shoot through the mesh?" We're like, "Well, we don't know if you can shoot through the mesh." So I got in the ground blind and I shot through the mesh, and it opened up in the mesh every time. And the concern was, what is the accuracy after hitting that mesh?
Right.
Can I tell somebody that's okay?
Yeah.
Well, what we found is the mesh was the problem, not the broadhead. So if the mesh was super tight and the arrow was able to go through clean with no problems, the accuracy was perfect. But if the mesh was loose and caused that blade not to be able to go through, nice and clean, you don't know where that arrow was going to go. So we just finally told people no mesh. And so I think that would be the same downrange if something else happened. When you hit a branch, you can't help but deflecting. Even if the drive key opens and the blades open, you're going to get some type of deflection just because of the inherent, speed reaction when it hits an object.
Right.
But just from straight flight, our experience out of the blind was really good, actually.
Yeah, it doesn't look too much different than the EXT, just a little wider.
Right.
So.
Right. But we do, we just don't advise people don't shoot them out of the blind because the mesh will deploy them.
Yeah, I mean, I don't think I'd ever shoot through the mesh anyway.
The first time I shot them, I didn't shoot through the mesh. I shot through the blind. You ever do that? Where you're looking through the sight, you think everything's perfect, and your chair's a little bit too low, and you draw back, and you're so focused, and you let loose, and all this noise happens, and you found out your arrow just cut your zipper.
If you get in my uncle's blind, there's like 3 holes below.
I've even. I probably hunted out of a man-made ground blind maybe once, twice, maybe 3 times my whole life. Like I've never shot out of a blind ever.
Yeah.
Like when we were kids, we used to make little makeshift blinds, like
Yeah.
a little fort, whatever. You go out and stack logs up next to a tree and do whatever, even during turkey season with shotguns. But never been in that scenario. Never shot out of a blind.
You should see if you could shoot through the blind and see what happens.
Can I use your blind?
Sure, but you have to use your own bow and arrows.
Does Afflictor have a true mechanical head, or is it just the hybrid and the fixed?
We have the hybrid and the fixed, but you never know what you're gonna see.
That's fair.
You never know what you're gonna see. The owner he's just super intelligent and got some great ideas, and he's always working on something. He's one of those inventors that's never satisfied. That's why it takes us so long to do something because we're testing and we get to the scenario when he finally has a good idea and he gets a prototype done. We actually have a guy we rent. He brings 4 high-speed cameras, and we're watching everything that's happening from before the target to in the target. We want to see that entrance, the through and the exit. And so he gets a lot of ideas that we tested. I think they work great. He's like, nope, don't like that. Off to the next thing, which is good because it gives me a lot of confidence working for them that I don't have to support something that's second rate or that I wouldn't shoot myself or that I wouldn't recommend to somebody. Because again, for me, I'm not a trophy hunter. I'm a meat guy. I have got to put some deer in the freezer, and I have to depend on my equipment. And so for me, it was an easy choice. And I like that because I've had broadhead sponsors in the past where I'm like, can I use my own broadhead and then say I did this, you know? And I never did that, but you're like, you almost want to because you don't have any confidence in it.
Right.
So, you know, I'm just really grateful to be a part of it.
I have a couple quick, like, kind of rapid fire questions, and
Sure.
then
They true false?
no,
Okay,
not quite,
checking
not
on
quite.
that.
Either or.
Yeah, because then I can only be 50% wrong.
Yeah, it's kind of in line with that. So we'll buzz through those real quick, and then I want you to talk a little bit about the different SKUs, because you guys there's a lot of different broadhead SKUs that you guys
I get
have.
confused once in a while myself.
Even weights aside, like there's different weights obviously for different SKUs, but you know, you go to the website and there's 10 different things. And so
Yeah.
what's the difference between this and that? So a little clarification there.
Sure.
But so a couple rapid fire questions. I don't know if you have anything else, Cameron.
Yeah, I have one point to make.
Okay.
I'll do that now because it's on the hybrid, so
Okay.
we're still on the hybrid
Okay.
topic.
Go ahead.
One thing cool about these hybrids is I think one thing people don't do enough is practice with their broadheads. They shoot with their field tips, and then like they go to hunt and practice maybe one time, and then they're good. What's cool about these hybrid broadheads is they come with a pin that you can put inside the ferrule, and the blades won't open, but the tip is oversized, so the blades are kind of hidden, and you don't have to worry about sharpening your blades on your broadheads because the blades are never touching anything
Right.
until they're opened. So it's one little cool thing about these hybrid afflictor hybrids. You can practice with them and practice with them and practice with them, and the only thing you might have to replace is the O-ring.
Yeah.
Just don't forget to take that pin out.
Yeah.
Yeah, which is funny. You know, when we first started, we sent them with the pins in them. In the first year, I got 7. I remember every call. 7 people called and said, "Your broadhead did great, but it didn't open." So they had 7 recoveries, and all 7 of them had forgot to take their lock pin out of the ferrule.
Oh,
So they
jeez.
actually killed 7 deer our first year in business with the lock pin in.
Wow.
So it was really crazy.
Sometimes I hate to say it, but you have to
Shot
take.
placement.
Well, no, you have
Yeah.
to take. You got to take some of the work away from your customer. You know what I mean?
Yeah,
SIM cards.
they're in a little baggie in the back of the package now. So
Yeah, makes sense. So, quick question: blood trails are a thing that you know. There's a lot of questions that pop up even with new hunters. You know, how long to wait? Is the entry better than, you know? When you look at entry wounds or exit wounds, like which one's better? I know a lot of it's shot placement, height on the animal. There's a lot of variables in there. Generally speaking, what's more important for you? An entrance, a solid entrance, or a solid exit?
solid exit, hands down. Because, well, I'm a tree stand guy, so I know that my exit is going to be lower. I know blood's going to pull to the lowest spot.
Yep.
And you will see that your biggest complaint for blood trailers, no matter what broadhead they're shooting, are your ground guys, because they're shooting a level shot. And even a double lung, high lung, you may not have hardly any blood because it is all pulled in the cavity.
Yep.
And the deer's dead in 30 yards. So, you know, definitely for me, exit.
Yep, I totally agree. There was a situation where I shot a buck, actually with those Magnus heads in 2000, whatever that was, 14, whatever. Liver shot. I was in a tree stand. It was kind of a long shot. Didn't have, you know, a very, I guess, steep angle. So that exit, I did get a pass through, but that exit wasn't super low. That deer only went 40 or 50 yards, even with a liver shot. I have a drop of blood. If I wouldn't have seen him go down, I'd have been like,
Right.
what in the hell?
Yeah, absolutely. And I see that. I spend a lot of time in a bear camp helping out, and we see that our ground bear hunters, those bears are so much harder to track because that blood is always pulled in the bottom of the cavity. And the tree stand hunters, even though both those bears may not go 30 yards past the bait, you won't have any blood over one than the other.
Right. Next question. What broadhead are you shooting out of your personal setup for whitetails? I know you do a lot of different stuff. I want to know what you're shooting. What is your setup for whitetails?
That's not even fair. Here's why that's not fair. Because I change my platform 3 times during season. I start with recurve. As it gets colder, I switch to compound. And when I have to put on a bunch of fluffy clothes to stay warm, I go to the crossbow.
Okay.
So I will say in my compound setup, I am shooting a hybrid. I'm shooting the K2 hybrid because that's our biggest cut, 1 3/4 inch. I love it. Giant holes on both sides, tremendous. I love that broadhead. On my trad, I am shooting a hybrid broadhead. I'm shooting a
Really?
150 grain model, and I love it. It does a fantastic job. And on the crossbow, K2 fixed, hands down. I mean, I've shot everything. I've killed a lot of deer out of the crossbow with all of our broadheads. But that K2 fixed, literally, I've gone through both shoulders, broke lower leg bone, complete pass-through. I don't know. It's special. So that's my roundabout, not really exact answer for you.
No, that's good. That's good.
Why aren't you shooting, if you believe so heavily in the K2 fixed, why aren't you shooting it across all 3 platforms?
I don't need to. Well, first of all, I have to be able to speak intelligently when somebody calls.
That's
so
fair.
I switch stuff all the time. So in turkey season, I'm shooting something different. Throughout deer season, I will use something different. But my go-to, that K2 hybrid, was what I originally had. That's all we had, right? So that's what I started with. That's what I fell in love with. It does a great job. So it's hard for me to pull away from that on my compound, and it flies great really far. So does the fixed. But for whitetail, I'm not worried about the K2 fixed holds up in the shoulders, and I don't have any issues. Or the hybrid, and so I just continue to use it.
Yep.
That's fair.
Just personal preference.
Yep. Okay, that's all I had. Just those 2 questions.
Oh,
I was built up. I was
I was
this is gonna be
already.
good, yeah.
I was like, I wonder what he could ask.
No, that was it.
What if you're shooting a bear?
Well, I like the K2 hybrid for bear a lot, but the reason I like the K2 fixed slightly better for bear is because of their fat layer. It will seal up on everything. And usually on a fixed blade, when you shoot a bear, that fat just comes right back in and sucks together, and you have a harder blood trail unless they're running, and then they continue to open that fat as they run. That broadhead, for some reason, if you go and you look on our Instagram and our Facebook and other places, it leaves a 20 gauge slug hole. It literally leaves a hole, and it's almost like a coring technology that it has inherently because of its size and shape. And we have had just tremendous success even with bad shots on bears with that broadhead.
Is that because of how many revolutions it's making when it hits the animal,
I don't think
or
so.
what?
I think it's a combination of the tip and the blades. I really
Interesting.
do, because I think a lot of times once something hits the animal, there's not much more revolution happening.
Yeah.
You know, and you'll see a lot of guys, they love that single bevel type design because they want that twisting continuous cut because it's supposed to be making a lot more cutting as it goes through. And in all of my testing, I haven't personally seen any massive difference between a single bevel and a standard broadhead like that that's actually coring and cutting and making a big difference. I've actually seen decreased. I know nobody wants to hear that, but in my personal testing on big cut, fixed blade, single bevels, I've seen decreased penetration over a design like that.
Interesting. We didn't shoot any single bevel heads last week at all. I don't think there's really a need to. Once I shot that, I was like, okay, well, that was easy. This is it. Flies great. I didn't have to do anything special to tune. I mean, my bow's in spec. My arrow build is right. I didn't have to do anything special. They shot phenomenal. They were on point with my field points. That's all I need.
Yep.
Yeah.
And I don't have to worry about,
And that's how most guys are,
Shoot the
right?
deer.
I mean,
yeah, shoot the deer.
Most guys are going to put minimal practice in. They're going to put minimal preparation in. And so it almost becomes necessary to be able to direct them to something that they can screw on and hunt.
Yep.
Even though when I talk to them personally, I'm like, you need to practice, you need to do this, try
Right.
this, do this. I can only suggest, because you want to do what's best for the animal sometimes more than you do the hunter, because some of these guys, you talk to them and you really get worried about what they're shooting. But that's, we just do the best we can to direct them to what's going to give them the most success.
All right. Well, we've been we're closing in on an hour here. Let's kind of get in the direction to wrap this up. Before we do that, though, give us a brief overview of everything that you guys have, because there's a lot of, like I said, there's a lot of different SKUs. Just not even point weight, but there's specific heads you guys have designed for hogs. There's the hybrid stuff, the fixed stuff, the mechanical. So just give us a brief overview.
Okay, I think I can wrap that up in a nice little package, I think. So if you think of a Flichter, we have three main categories, but everything is hinged on our tips. Okay, so we have one tip that's really wide, and that is our K2 platform. So under that platform, We have a bunch of different broadheads in the hybrid category that start at 1 3/4 cut and move all the way down to 1.5 and move all the way to 175 grains. And then underneath that, we have the K2 fixed, which in a couple weeks here, you'll be able to get that in 100 grain, 125 grain, 155 grain, 175 grain, and 195 grain. So we're going to help all these poor FOC guys out and make sure they have something they can pick from. So that basically wraps up that entire line under the EXT tip. And
K2.
Yes, thank you, K2. See, I'm getting ahead of myself. So the other tip is our steeper angle tip, and that's our EXT tip, and it has a much steeper angle. And under that, we have a series of hybrid that go from 1 3/4 to 1.5, and then we have the fixed, which is 1 1/4, more traditional 2-blade. And again, the hybrids will go to 175, and the fixed will go all the way up to 195. So even though when you look at that, there's a lot of things that are getting categorized in there, when you break down the broadheads in each category to get those weights on those hybrids from 150 and up, we move to a stainless steel ferrule. So when you're looking at the website and you're getting a little bit confused on what's what, you'll see that there's a stainless steel option that helps get the weight up, and that's where things start to change. On the EXT line, the only variation that you're going to see is on the Hybrid X Mini. That was our old ultraviolet. You'll see because of that steep angled tip, the blades slightly sweep out after the tip. And that's just a personal preference thing. It's basically on the same design as our K2 Mini. It's same cut at 1.5 inches. The only difference being that those blades sweep out. We've seen no difference in ballistic gel on penetration, so it becomes just some personal preference things.
Got it. Got it.
In a nutshell, that's about as simple as I can explain it.
No, makes sense. That clarified some things for me. I know just last week, just making the announcement, like, hey, we're shooting broadheads all week. This is what I picked. There was some interest there on Instagram. So for folks to learn more about you, Afflictor, what you guys have to offer, where are you going to send them?
They can go to our website at www.afflictorbroadheads.com. We are very active on our social media. So if you're a social media guy and you want to be on Instagram or Facebook, you can get an answer pretty quick through that platform. If it isn't right away, it'll be within 24 hours. And of course, you can call us at any time as well, and you'll get a live person. And if you don't, a live person will call you back. We're swamped right now, of course. Lots of calls, lots of stuff going on social. So if you do have to wait a half a day or a couple hours, I apologize for that. But we will get back with you, guaranteed. Customer service is our #1 priority. And you can call if you have a broadhead question, you want to call us. Of course, we want you to buy Afflictor, but if another broadhead is what you're looking for and you have questions about it, and maybe we've tested it and shot it and we can help you and you choose that, that's okay. We're all in this together, right? We're all hunters. We all got to make choices. My thing may not be what everybody else wants or needs, but we're happy to help any of these new guys that have questions. Call us. Let us direct you into something that will be successful for you.
I love it. Love everything about that. And also, be sure to check out their YouTube channel. That's going to be getting geared up here in the next couple weeks.
Yes.
All the stuff we talked about, there's going to be a ton of videos, very educational, non-subjective type value prop videos there to help educate folks and to help get them geared up and answer some general questions about broadheads, arrows, all of that, all the above. So,
Awesome.
Chris, thanks for your time.
Yeah,
we
thank
greatly
you guys very much.
Greatly appreciate it. We'll have to do this again. You're right here in Trimble County. It makes no sense for
it sounds good
for us not to get together more often. So again, greatly appreciate it, folks. Thank you for tuning in. Thanks for listening. If you would do us a big favor and go leave us a written review, that helps us a ton. Helps us grow the podcast ranks, specifically as we're getting into this hunting season. More and more people are going to be downloading podcasts, checking out some information while they're driving to hunting camp or their leases, and those reviews, as those grow, that helps us find those new people. So if you guys would do that for us, it would be greatly appreciated. Until next time.